The darkness of space above Earth suddenly filled with light as 10,000 warships materialized in perfect formation around the planet, like a metal cage closing around prey that had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide from the overwhelming force that had just arrived without warning or mercy in their intentions. Admiral Krelvin of the Zetharian Imperium stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Worldbreaker, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he gazed at the primitive blue planet below through the massive viewing screen that dominated the forward wall of the command center, where his crew worked with efficient precision at their stations. 50,000 years of conquest had taught the Zetharians exactly how this would unfold, because it always unfolded the same way across every star system and every species they had encountered in their long march across the galaxy that had seen them subjugate 247 different civilizations without ever facing serious resistance. Scan the planet. Krelvin ordered his tactical officer, who immediately bent over her console to analyze the human defensive capabilities with sensors so advanced they could count individual weapons from orbit and categorize them by threat level in seconds. Sir, the humans have approximately 193 defensive platforms in orbit around their world, the tactical officer reported after a moment of scanning. Energy signatures suggest primitive plasma weapons and kinetic railguns at best, and their technology appears to be at least 300 years behind our current military standard. Krelvin nodded because this too was expected, since young species rarely developed proper military technology before they encountered the Imperium and learned the hard way that the galaxy was not a friendly place for the weak or unprepared. Open a channel to the planetary government, he commanded, and waited as his communications officer established the connection that would carry his ultimatum to every screen and every speaker on the planet below, where billions of humans were about to learn their world was no longer their own. The channel opened, and Krelvin began the speech he had given so many times before that he could recite it in his sleep without missing a single word or emphasis. People of Earth, I am Admiral Krelvin of the Zetharian Imperium, and I bring you a simple message that will determine the future of your species and your world. He announced in the common galactic trade language that his ship's computers would translate into all major human languages simultaneously. Surrender now and accept incorporation into the Imperium as a tributary state, he continued. You will pay taxes to support our military, and you will provide resources and labor as required, but your people will be allowed to live, and your cities will remain standing. He paused for effect, as he always did at this point in the speech, because the pause gave the target species time to understand the weight of what was being offered before he delivered the consequence of refusal. Refuse, and we will demonstrate our power by destroying your orbital installations and reducing 3 of your major cities to ash as an example to the survivors, who will then surrender anyway, but under much worse terms for your species. Another pause, and then the final stroke that always broke their resistance. You have 24 hours to decide. But know this. We have 10,000 warships surrounding your planet, and you have less than 200 defensive platforms, he said. There is no reinforcement coming to save you, and there is no technology you possess that can challenge the might of the Imperium, so choose wisely. He closed the channel and settled back in his command chair to wait for the inevitable surrender that would come within hours as the humans realized the hopelessness of their situation. 3 hours passed, and Krelvin grew puzzled, because usually the target species sent frantic transmissions, begging for more time, or trying to negotiate better terms, or simply screaming in panic at the reality of their situation. Instead, Earth remained eerily silent, with no military mobilization detected and no evacuation of major cities, and no sign of the chaos that typically gripped a civilization facing conquest. Are they preparing something? Krelvin asked his tactical officer, who shook her head in confusion. No, sir, she replied. Their defensive platforms remain in standby mode, and we detect no weapons charging and no ships launching from their orbital facilities or planetary spaceports. Perhaps they are simply paralyzed by fear, suggested his second-in-command, who stood at Krelvin's right hand as he had for the past 20 campaigns. Perhaps. Krelvin agreed, though something about the silence bothered him in a way he could not quite articulate. 20 hours into the deadline, a single transmission came from Earth, and Krelvin ordered it displayed on the main screen, expecting to see some planetary leader begging for mercy or asking for impossible concessions. Instead, a human woman in military uniform appeared on screen with short dark hair and calm eyes that showed no trace of fear or panic or desperation. "I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force," she said in clear galactic trade language. "I received your ultimatum, and I wanted to make a small correction before we proceed." Krelvin leaned forward in his chair because this was unexpected, and unexpected things made him nervous after 50,000 years of predictable conquests. "You stated that you have 10,000 warships surrounding Earth." Admiral Chun continued with the same unnerving calm. "I wanted to amend that statement for accuracy." She paused, and then smiled slightly in a way that did not reach her eyes. "You had 10,000 warships," she said. "The demonstration will begin in 60 seconds, and I suggest you pay attention, because we will only show you once before you make your final decision." The transmission ended, and Krelvin stared at the blank screen in confusion. "What does she mean we had 10,000? He demanded. "Check the fleet count immediately, sir. All 10,000 ships are accounted for, and..." The tactical officer stopped mid-sentence as her console began shrieking warnings. Energy spike from the lunar surface. She screamed massive power buildup like nothing in our database. Krelvin had exactly 2 seconds to understand that he had made a terrible mistake before a beam of coherent light wider than his flagship punched through his formation like a spear through paper. 47 ships simply ceased to exist as their atoms were ripped apart by energies that should not have been possible for a species Earth's age to generate or control. The beam lasted exactly 2.3 seconds before shutting down and leaving a perfectly straight corridor of expanding debris. Clouds through the Zetherian formation. Then Admiral Chun's voice returned. "You now have 9,953 warships," she said calmly. "Every hour you remain in Earth orbit, we will subtract more until you leave or until you are gone, and we prefer you choose to leave." Krelvin sat frozen in his command chair as his crew erupted into panic chatter around him. For the first time in the Zetherian Imperium's long history of conquest, someone had drawn first blood against them, and he had no idea what to do next. Admiral Krelvin ordered his fleet to hold position while he tried to understand what had just happened, because nothing in the Imperium's vast database of conquered species suggested that humans should possess weapons capable of such devastating precision and power. Analysis. He barked at his science officer, who was frantically reviewing the data from the attack with hands that trembled slightly. "Despite years of military discipline, sir, the weapon appears to be some kind of coherent photonic array that focused stellar-level energies into a beam approximately 300 meters wide." The science officer reported, "The precision is unlike anything we have encountered, because the beam passed within 2 kilometers of 7 of our ships, without damaging them, while completely vaporizing the 47 targets in its direct path. How is that possible for a species that should still be developing basic fusion technology?" Krelvin demanded. "Unknown, sir," the science officer admitted. "Our intelligence on human technological development appears to be severely outdated or deliberately misleading." Krelvin considered his options while his crew watched him with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed fear, because Zetharian warriors were trained to face superior numbers, but not superior technology. It was one shot from one weapon, he announced with more confidence than he felt. "They are bluffing about sustained capability, because if they could fire that weapon continuously, they would have destroyed more ships already." His second-in-command nodded agreement, because it was logical and the Zetharians prided themselves on logic above all else in military matters. "We will advance slowly," Krelvin ordered. "Maintain maximum shield strength and keep sensor locks on that lunar installation, and if they fire again, we will have microseconds of warning to take evasive action." The fleet began moving forward in a careful formation designed to minimize potential casualties from another beam attack, while targeting solutions were calculated for the human. Defensive platforms that still had not powered up their weapons earth remained silent for 3 hours as the Zetharian fleet closed the distance from high orbit to low orbit where their weapons would be most effective against planetary targets. Then every alarm on every ship in the fleet began screaming simultaneously. Energy spikes everywhere. The tactical officer shouted over the cacophony of warnings. Multiple sources, planetary surface, lunar surface, orbital platforms, all reading. Critical power levels. Evasive maneuvers now. Krelvin commanded, but it was already too late. The 193 platforms that the Zetharians had dismissed as primitive defensive installations suddenly revealed their true nature as quantum-linked weapons clusters that each controlled not dozens, but thousands of autonomous hunter drones that had been hiding in orbital debris and asteroid fragments, and stealth trajectories waiting for this exact moment. The drones were small, no larger than human sports equipment, and they moved at velocities that made them nearly impossible to track or target because they were not driven by conventional engines, but by exotic matter propulsion systems to bench space around them. Worse, they were not using energy weapons that Zetharian shields were designed to deflect, but kinetic impactors traveling at 90% of light speed that punched through shields like they were not even there. The first wave hit the forward elements of the Zetharian formation, and 200 ships exploded in rapid succession as relativistic projectiles tore through reactors and command centers and weapons arrays. With mathematical precision, shields are ineffective, the tactical officer reported unnecessarily, because everyone on the bridge could see the destruction unfolding on their screens. The projectiles are too small and too fast for point defense. To track, return fire on those platforms, Krelvin ordered, but even as his weapons crews tried to lock onto the human installations, they discovered another unpleasant surprise. The platforms were moving in impossible patterns that suggested they were not actually physical objects in fixed positions, but quantum projections that existed in multiple locations simultaneously, making them impossible to target with conventional weapons. "Sir, we cannot achieve weapons lock," the weapons officer reported. "The targets are showing quantum uncertainty at the macro scale, which should be impossible according to known physics." Another wave of kinetic drones slammed into the fleet, and another 150 ships disappeared from Krelvin's tactical display in explosions that briefly outshone the sun. "Full retreat," Krelvin finally ordered as he watched his supposedly overwhelming numerical advantage evaporate against an enemy that fought like nothing the Imperium had ever encountered. "All ships fall back to high orbit maximum speed." The surviving ships tried to comply, but the drones pursued them with relentless efficiency because they were faster and more maneuverable than anything the Zetharians could field by the time the fleet reached the relative safety of high orbit. 6 hours had passed, and Krelvin's tactical display showed 4,012 ships, remaining from the original 10,000. He had lost more ships in 6 hours than the Imperium had lost in the previous 1,000 years of conquest combined. "Sir, incoming transmission from Earth," his communications officer reported with a voice that shook despite her best efforts to maintain professional composure. "Display it," Krelvin ordered, because he needed to see the face of the enemy who had just taught the Imperium what it felt like to be Pre-Admiral. Chun appeared on screen again with the same calm expression and the same slight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Admiral Krelvin, I hope." That demonstration was more convincing than the first one, she said pleasantly, as if she had not just orchestrated the deaths of thousands of Zetharian warriors. You have now lost almost 6,000 ships in less than 7 hours, she continued. My analysts predict that at this rate your entire fleet will be destroyed in approximately 12 more hours if you choose to continue hostilities. She leaned forward slightly, and her expression hardened. However, I am authorized to offer you an alternative, she said. You can withdraw your remaining forces from Earth, orbit immediately, and return to Zetharian space with a message for your Imperium. What message? Krelvin asked because his pride was wounded, but his survival instinct was stronger. Tell them that Earth is not for conquest, Admiral Chun replied. Tell them that we have been watching the Imperium for 80 years ever since we detected your invasion of the Felian system. And we have spent those decades preparing for this exact scenario. She smiled again, and this time it was genuinely amused. Tell them that we studied every battle you ever fought, and every tactic you ever used, and every weakness in your technology and your doctrine. She continued. Tell them that we built our entire defensive strategy around defeating the Zetharian Imperium, specifically because we knew eventually you would come for us. Krelvin felt something he had not felt in his 300 years of military service, and it took him a moment to recognize the emotion as fear. And if we refuse to withdraw, he asked, though he already knew the answer, then we will continue reducing your fleet by approximately 1,000 ships every hour until you are all gone, Admiral Chun said matter-of-factly. We have already manufactured enough drones to destroy a fleet 10 times your current size, and we can manufacture more faster than you can bring reinforcements. She paused, and her expression softened slightly. I would prefer you choose to leave, she added, because despite what your culture teaches about the weak and the strong, I do not enjoy killing people who were just following orders from leaders who did not know what they were facing. Krelvin sat in silence for a long moment while his crew waited for his decision. We will withdraw, he finally said, but the Imperium will not accept this defeat, and they will return with a force large enough to overwhelm even your impressive defenses. Then we will be ready. Admiral Chun replied simply, we are always ready, and that is something the Imperium is going to learn the hard way. The transmission ended, and Krelvin began issuing orders to prepare the fleet for withdrawal, while simultaneously sending a priority message to the Imperium High Command. He needed reinforcements, and he needed them immediately, because humanity had just rewritten every assumption the Zetharians held about conquest and warfare and survival, and Krelvin had the terrible feeling that this was only the beginning. 3 days after Krelvin's battered fleet retreated to the edge of Earth's solar system, a response arrived from the Zetharian Imperium High Command, and it was not the cautious reinforcement Krelvin had requested, but rather the largest military deployment the Imperium had authorized in 6 centuries of expansion. 30,000 additional warships emerged from hyperspace in a formation so vast it created gravitational distortions that Earth's astronomers detected from the planetary surface. Supreme Commander Vexler commanded this armada from aboard the Imperial Dreadnought Infinite Conquest, a vessel so massive it could deploy its own fleet of support ships from internal hangar bays that stretched for kilometers. Admiral Krelvin, you have embarrassed the Imperium with your failure, Vexler announced over the fleet-wide channel so that all 34,000 ships and their crews could hear his haiu. Contempt, a species barely capable of reaching their own moon, has destroyed 6,000 of our warships because you underestimated them. Krelvin stood at attention on his own bridge, while his crew carefully avoided looking at him during this public humiliation. Supreme Commander, the humans possess technology far beyond what our intelligence suggested. Krelvin responded. Their weapons operate on principles our scientists cannot fully explain, and their defensive capabilities exceed anything we have encountered. Then we will overwhelm them with numbers, Vexler declared. Prepare your remaining ships to join the main assault because we will advance on Earth with the full strength of this combined fleet and no defensive system can withstand such overwhelming force. Krelvin wanted to argue that the humans had demonstrated they could destroy 1,000 ships per hour, which meant even 34,000 ships might not be enough, but he also knew that questioning a Supreme Commander was a fast path to execution for cowardice. The combined fleet began moving toward Earth in a formation designed to present the smallest possible target profile while maintaining overlapping shield coverage and concentrated firepower. What happened next surprised everyone, including Krelvin, who thought he understood what the humans were capable of after his previous defeat. Instead of opening fire immediately, the humans broadcast an open communication channel that appeared simultaneously on every screen in the Zetharian fleet. A human male appeared, wearing not military uniform, but civilian clothing, and he spoke with the calm authority of someone who held no doubt about the outcome of this confrontation. I am Dr. James Okafor, and I represent the Earth Diplomatic Corps. The human began. I want to take a moment to explain something to Supreme Commander Vexler and to all of you who have conquered our world. Dr. Okafor touched a control, and the screen split to show footage of Zetharian ships engaging in battles across dozens of different star systems. We have been watching the Imperium for 80 years, he continued. We have recorded every engagement you fought, and every tactic you employed, and every technological system you deployed against the species you conquered. The footage began highlighting specific patterns in Zetharian combat doctrine, showing how they relied on overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority rather than tactical innovation or adaptive strategy. You fight the same way every time, Dr. Okafor observed. You assume that bigger fleets and more powerful weapons will always defeat smaller forces, and that assumption has served you well for 50,000 years. He paused and smiled in a way that made Krelvin's skin crawl. But you have never fought a species that spent 80 years preparing specifically to defeat you, the human said. You have never fought a species that built every weapon and every defensive system and every tactical doctrine around countering the Zetharian Imperium. The screen changed to show a three-dimensional tactical display of the space surrounding Earth, and suddenly thousands upon thousands of small contacts appeared like stars winking into existence. Supreme Commander Vexlar, you currently have 34,000 ships in Earth space. Dr. Okafor announced, you are surrounded by 200,000 autonomous defense drones hiding in orbital debris and asteroid clusters and stealth trajectories, waiting for my signal to activate. The tactical display zoomed in to show the Zetharian fleet as a small cluster in the center of a vast sphere of human weapons platforms. I'm going to demonstrate this by activating exactly 1% of our defensive grid. The human continued. That is 2,000 drones out of 200,000 total, and I want you to watch what happens. He touched another control, and suddenly 2,000 of the contacts on the display lit up with active sensor signatures. The Zetharian sensor crews went into immediate panic, as their systems were overwhelmed by targets that appeared from nowhere and moved in patterns that suggested they had been waiting in position for days or weeks. As you can see, we are not bluffing about our capabilities, Dr. Okafor said calmly. While Zetharian commanders throughout the fleet tried to formulate responses to this revelation, those 2,000 drones could destroy approximately 400 of your ships before you could coordinate an effective defense. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Now imagine what 200,000 drones could do. He suggested, our analysts calculate that we could eliminate your entire fleet in approximately 42 minutes if we committed all available resources to the task. Supreme Commander Vexler's face appeared on a secondary screen, and even through the translation software, his fury was evident. You dare threaten the Imperium, he roared. We will reduce your planet to molten slag before we accept defeat. From primitives, that would be unfortunate, Dr. Okafor replied without any change in his calm demeanor. Not just for Earth, but for the 247 species currently living under Zetherian occupation. He touched another control, and the screen showed images of the species the Imperium had conquered over millennia. You see, Supreme Commander, we are not going to keep this defensive technology to ourselves. The human explained. If you force us to destroy your fleet, we will immediately begin sharing our weapon systems with every species you have ever conquered. The implications of that statement rippled through the Zetherian command structure like a shockwave, because if their tributary species gained access to weapons that could defeat Imperium forces, the entire structure of their civilization would collapse. Within 1 year of your defeat here, the Imperium would face rebellions on every conquered world. Dr. Okafor continued, rebellions led by species armed with quantum-linked weapons clusters and relativistic kinetic impactors and autonomous defense drones. He smiled again. Your entire empire would burn, he said simply. Not because we want that outcome, but because you forced us to defend ourselves. And the best way to ensure Earth's long-term safety is to eliminate the threat the Imperium represents. Krelvin watched Supreme Commander Vexlor's expression change from fury to calculation, because however arrogant the Imperium's leadership might be, they were not stupid enough to ignore a genuine threat to their civilization's survival. However, there is an alternative, Dr. Okafor offered. You can withdraw your fleet from Earth space immediately, and we will not share our technology with your tributary species, and we will not attack your retreating forces. You would let us leave after we came to conquer you? Vexlor asked suspiciously. Yes, Dr. Okafor confirmed, because we do not seek galactic domination or revenge or expansion, and we simply want to be left alone to develop our civilization in peace. He leaned forward slightly. But make no mistake, Supreme Commander, he added, if you refuse this offer and force us to destroy you, we will ensure that the Zetharian Imperium becomes a cautionary tale that echoes across the galaxy for the next 50,000 years. You will tell every species that might consider conquest that humanity showed mercy once and only once, and we will not make that offer again. The transmission ended and left the Zetharian fleet in stunned silence. Krelvin knew what would happen next, because he could read Vexlor's expression even across the communication channel. Supreme Commander would choose pride over survival and order the attack because the Imperium had never retreated and never surrendered in its entire history, and humanity would teach them why there was a first time for everything. Supreme Commander Vexlor stared at the tactical display showing 200,000 human defensive drones surrounding his fleet, and knew that he faced a decision that would define his legacy and possibly determine the future of the Zetharian Imperium itself. His first instinct was to order an immediate attack because the Imperium had built its reputation on never backing down and never showing weakness to species that might interpret mercy as an invitation to rebel. But his tactical training and 3 centuries of military experience told him that attacking would result in the complete destruction of his fleet and the collapse of the political structure that had kept 247 conquered species under Zetharian control. Supreme Commander, we should withdraw, Admiral Krelvin suggested over a private channel. I have fought these humans, and their technological advantage is real, and their willingness to use overwhelming force is demonstrated, and we cannot win this engagement. The Imperium does not retreat. Vexlor replied automatically, though his voice lacked conviction. The Imperium has never faced an enemy like this. Krelvin countered, an enemy that studied us for 80 years and built their entire military specifically to defeat us, and an enemy that offers mercy when they could simply destroy us and take what they want. Vexlor considered this while his tactical officers waited for orders, and his crew watched him with expressions that ranged from eagerness for battle to barely concealed fear. If we withdraw the tributary species, we'll see it as weakness, Vexlor argued. They will rise in rebellion, thinking that if humans can defeat us, then perhaps they can as well. If we attack and lose the tributary species, we'll receive human weapons. Technology, Krelvin pointed out. And then they will rise in rebellion with the tools to actually succeed, and the Imperium will fall within a generation. The logic was inescapable. And Vexler knew it even as every instinct screamed at him to fight rather than flee before he could make his decision. A new transmission arrived from Earth, and this time it was not Dr. Okafor, but Admiral Chun, who had bloodied Krelvin's fleet. In the first engagement, Supreme Commander, I know what you are thinking, she said with that same unnerving calm. You are weighing your pride against your survival and your desire to maintain the Imperium's reputation against the reality that you cannot win this battle. She smiled slightly. Let me make this easier for you, she continued. I am going to show you exactly what will happen if you order your fleet to attack Earth. The screen changed to show a computer simulation of the battle that would unfold if Vexler gave that order. The simulation was horrifyingly detailed and showed exactly how human defensive systems would systematically dismantle the Zetharian fleet using tactics and weapons that exploited every weakness in Imperium technology. And doctrine ships exploded in sequence as quantum-targeted kinetic impactors struck reactors and command centers with microsecond precision, while energy weapons carved through formations and autonomous drones swarmed individual vessels like predators, taking down much larger prey. The simulation showed that the battle would last exactly 41 minutes and 53 seconds and would result in the complete destruction of all 34,000 Zetharian ships with 0 human casualties. This is not speculation or propaganda, Admiral Chun explained as the simulation played out its devastating conclusion. This is what our tactical computers predict with 99.7% confidence based on our complete understanding of your technology and your combat doctrine. She paused to let that sink in. Now let me show you the alternative, she said, and the simulation changed to show the Zetharian fleet withdrawing from Earth space and returning to Imperium territory intact. You leave with your fleet and your honor and your lives. Admiral Chun continued. You return to your worlds and tell your leadership that Earth is defended by technology they cannot currently defeat, and that attempting further conquest would result in the collapse of the Imperium. And most importantly, you tell them that humanity offered peace when we could have chosen war. The simulation showed a timeline extending decades into the future where the Imperium redirected resources from military expansion to internal development and eventually opened diplomatic channels with Earth and other independent species. This is the future we prefer, Admiral Chun said. A future where the Imperium survives and changes and eventually becomes a partner in galactic civilization rather than a predator. Vexler wanted to dismiss this as human arrogance, but the simulation had been too accurate and too detailed to be mere speculation. You have studied us for 80 years, he said slowly. Why offer us this choice when you could simply destroy us and eliminate a potential threat permanently? Because we studied your culture as well as your military, Admiral Chun replied. We know that the Imperium values strength and respects power, and we believe that by demonstrating overwhelming superiority and then choosing mercy, we send a stronger message than simple destruction would achieve. She leaned forward. We want the Imperium to understand that Earth is not weak, and we want your tributary species to understand that there are alternatives to endless conquest, she explained. And we want the galaxy to see that the most powerful military force in this region of space chooses cooperation over domination when given the choice. That is a lesson worth teaching, she concluded, even if it means letting you leave when we could destroy you. Admiral Krelvin broke into the conversation from his own ship. Supreme Commander, she is offering us something no enemy has ever offered the Imperium, he said. The chance to retreat with dignity and learn from defeat rather than being annihilated for pride. I recommend we accept. Vexler stood silent on his bridge while thousands of warriors across hundreds of ships waited for his decision. Finally, he spoke. All ships prepare for withdrawal, he ordered. We will return to Imperium space and report to High Command that Earth is currently beyond our technological capability to conquer. Relief swept through the fleet as commanders began issuing orders to disengage and prepare for the hyperspace jump that would take them home. Admiral Chun. Vexlar addressed the human directly. The Imperium will remember this day and what you have taught. U.S. I hope you do, Admiral Chun replied, because the next species that comes to Earth with hostile intent will not receive the same offer. We only extend mercy once, she added. After that, we eliminate threats permanently. The transmission ended, and the Zetharian fleet began its withdrawal while Earth's defensive systems tracked every ship until they jumped to hyperspace. Krovan watched Earth disappear from his view screens and reflected on how a species barely capable of interstellar flight had defeated the greatest military power in the galaxy, not just with superior technology, but with superior strategy and superior understanding of their enemy. The humans had done more than win a battle. They had changed the fundamental equation of galactic politics by proving that prey species could become predators if given enough time and motivation to prepare, and they had shown mercy when they could have chosen vengeance. Sekrolan suspected that humanity's demonstration of power combined with their offer of peace would reshape the galaxy in ways no one could fully predict. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of something new was beginning, and it had started with a species that refused to surrender even when facing impossible odds. 3 weeks later, Admiral Krelvin stood before the Imperium High Command and delivered his full report on the Earth engagement, including the tactical analysis and the strategic implications, and the recommendation that the Imperium avoid any further hostile contact with humanity. The High Command listened in silence as he described weapon systems that operated on principles Zetharian science could not explain, and defensive capabilities that made conquest impossible with current military technology. What do you recommend? The High Counselor asked when Krelvin finished his presentation. I recommend we open diplomatic channels with Earth, Krelvin replied, and I recommend we begin studying their approach to defense and their willingness to share technology with species threatened by conquest. Because if we do not adapt to this new reality, we will face rebellions from tributary species armed with human weapons, and those rebellions will succeed. The High Command began debating, but Krelvin already knew the outcome. The Imperium would change, or it would fall. Humanity had made certain of that. The Zetharian Imperium's withdrawal from Earth space should have marked the end of the conflict, but Admiral Krelvin knew his species well enough to understand that not everyone would accept defeat with the same pragmatic calculation that's supreme. Commander Vexler had demonstrated 5,000 ships under the command of War Prince. Thekener refused the withdrawal order and broke formation as the main fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace. This is treason, Vexler declared over the fleet-wide channel as he watched the rebels accelerate toward Earth. Stand down immediately or face execution for violating direct orders. The only treason is retreat, Thekener replied, and his voice carried the absolute certainty of a fanatic who would rather die than accept that the Imperium could be defeated. We will show these humans what happens when they humiliate the greatest military power in the galaxy. We will burn their cities and salt their fields, and leave their world as a monument to the cost of resisting the Imperium. Admiral Chun's voice cut across the Zetharian command channels with the same calm authority she had displayed throughout the crisis. War Prince Thekener, you are making a fatal mistake, she announced. Supreme Commander Vexlar chose wisdom over pride, and his fleet will survive because of that choice. You are choosing pride over wisdom, and your fleet will not survive the next 90 seconds. We will see about that. Thekener snarled and ordered his ships to maximum acceleration toward Earth's populated continents, where billions of humans lived in cities that had no direct defensive shields. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. As the definitive example of what occurred when technological superiority met suicidal determination, the humans did not activate 1% of their defensive grid as they had demonstrated to. Vexillarthi did not activate 10% or even 50%. They activated the entire system too. 100,000 autonomous defense drones came online simultaneously and created a sphere of active weapon platforms so dense that Tekener's tactical display simply showed his fleet as a small cluster. Surrounded by a solid wall of hostile contacts, all weapons fire. Tekener ordered, but his ships never got the chance. Earth's orbital defense grid had been designed not for demonstration or deterrence, but for the absolute elimination of any threat to the planetary population, and it executed that function with mechanical precision. Every single drone in the network received targeting data simultaneously through quantum-linked communications that allowed for perfect coordination across millions of individual weapon platforms. Every single reactor signature in Tekener's fleet was identified and prioritized and assigned multiple redundant targeting solutions to ensure no ship could survive through luck or evasion, and then the grid fired. Thousands of Zetharian warships ceased to exist in exactly 91 seconds. Not 91 seconds of battle, but 91 seconds of systematic execution as kinetic impactors, traveling at relativistic speeds, punched through shields and hulls and reactors with such overwhelming force that the ships did not just explode, but vaporized into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Tekener's flagship, the Pride of Conquest, lasted 3 seconds longer than the rest of his fleet, and in those final moments he understood with perfect clarity that humanity had been holding back during every previous engagement. They had demonstrated mercy to Vexler by showing him a fraction of their capabilities. They had offered peace because they genuinely preferred it to war, but when forced to defend their world against an enemy determined to harm civilians, they revealed the true depth of their defensive preparations. Last thing Tekener saw before his ship's reactor breached was his tactical display showing 0 surviving vessels from his entire fleet. Then he died along with every other warrior who had chosen fanaticism over survival. Admiral Krelvin watched the destruction from the safety of the withdrawing main fleet and felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of military service. Not fear or anger or shame, but a profound sense of witnessing a fundamental shift in the nature of galactic civilization. Record everything, he ordered his sensor crews. The Imperium needs to see exactly what happened here. The recording showed 5,000 ships reduced to debris in less than 2 minutes with such overwhelming efficiency that it was clear the humans could have destroyed the entire 34,000 ship fleet just as easily. More importantly, the recording showed that not a single kinetic impactor or energy beam had struck anything except Tekener's ships. Every weapon in that massive defensive grid had fired with such precision that civilian orbital stations and commercial shipping, and even the debris from destroyed Zetharian vessels remained untouched. They could have wiped out everything in Earth orbit. Krelvin's tactical officer observed with awe, but they only destroyed the threats and left everything else intact. That is the difference between us and them. Krelvin replied quietly. We use overwhelming force to intimidate and conquer, but they use overwhelming force to protect and defend. And they are far better at it than we ever were. Admiral Chun's final transmission arrived as the main Zetharian fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace. Admiral Krelvin, I want you to take a message back to your Imperium, she said, and her expression was serious but not hostile. What you just witnessed was Earth's defensive capability when protecting our civilian population from a direct military threat. We eliminated War Prince Theckener's fleet because he left us no choice, and because allowing him to attack our cities would have resulted in millions of human deaths. She paused. But I want to be very clear about something, she continued. This demonstration was not meant to intimidate the Imperium or to threaten your species with destruction. It was meant to show you that Earth can and will defend itself against any threat, no matter how large or determined that threat might be. She smiled slightly. We are broadcasting this engagement data to every species in the known galaxy with a very simple message. She explained, Earth is defended, and Earth is open for diplomacy and trade and friendship, but Earth will not be conquered. Any species that approaches us with peaceful intent will be welcomed. Any species that approaches us with hostile intent will be eliminated. The transmission ended, and Krovan saved the message to include in his report to the Imperium. High Command 6 months later, Earth hosted the first Galactic Summit on Human Terms, and Admiral Krovan attended as the Zetharian Imperium's representative because he understood humanity better than any other Imperium officer. 70 species sent delegations, including 12 former Zetharian tributary states that had declared independence after seeing the recordings of Earth's defensive capabilities. The humans had kept their promise about sharing technology, and those 12 species now possessed defensive systems that made reconquest impossible without resources the Imperium could no longer afford to commit. The summit took place in a massive orbital station above Earth that humans had constructed specifically for diplomatic purposes, and the station itself was a demonstration of their technological advancement. Welcome, Admiral Chun greeted the assembled delegates. We have invited you here to discuss the formation of a new galactic organization dedicated to mutual defense and cooperative development. An organization where no species dominates another, and where technological advancement benefits everyone rather than serving as a tool of conquest. She looked directly at Krovan. The Zetharian Imperium is invited to join this organization on equal terms with every other species, she announced. We do not seek revenge for your attempted conquest, and we do not demand reparations or submission. We simply ask that you commit to peaceful coexistence and to defending the rights of all sapient species to develop their civilizations without external interference. Krovan stood and addressed the assembly. The Imperium accepts this invitation, he declared, and we acknowledge that our traditional approach to galactic expansion is no longer viable in this new era. Humanity has taught us that prey can become predators, and that mercy can be stronger than vengeance, and that cooperation can achieve more than conquest. We have learned these lessons at great cost, but we have learned them. The applause from the assembled delegates was hesitant at first, but grew stronger as species that had suffered under Imperium rule recognized that genuine change was occurring. Admiral Chun smiled and gestured to the viewing ports that showed Earth rotating peacefully below. This is the beginning of something new, she said. An age where species work together rather than against each other, and where strength is measured not by how many worlds you conquer, but by how many civilizations you help flourish. It will not be easy, and there will be setbacks and conflicts along the way, but it is worth attempting, Admiral. Krovan looked out at Earth and reflected on the journey that had brought him from confident conqueror to humble delegate. Humanity had rewritten the rules of galactic civilization, not through conquest, but through the demonstration of overwhelming defensive capability combined with genuine willingness to extend mercy and cooperation. They had shown the galaxy that there was an alternative to endless war and endless subjugation, and they had done it by refusing to surrender even when facing impossible odds. The age of conquest was ending. The age of cooperation was beginning.